Let's say you are a state restaurant association. Times have been tough. Your member restaurants have suffered under COVID, inflation, and having to pay workers money. But there is a new problem on the horizon: higher wages. A group called One Fair Wage is organizing to increase the minimum wage. Oh, how terrible! But even worse, they are going to eliminate the tip credit. Truly a fatal blow for any restaurant. How could they be so cruel? For those who don't know, a tip credit is when a restaurant pays a waiter, waitress, or bartender below the minimum wage with the expectation that tips will make up the difference. In essence, it is restaurants putting the responsibility of paying their employees onto their customers. Anyway, what to do about those meddling do-gooders trying to raise the minimum wage? One Fair Wage. I know what to do. We'll commission a rigged survey of tipped employees that will show they don't want the minimum wage increased. Once it's done, we'll announce it to the press and watch as the media mindlessly regurgitates whatever was put in front of them. The public won't know who to trust. It's a foolproof plan. Now, you may be a little skeptical of this scenario. Fair enough. How could something like this happen? But that's not the question you should be asking. The question you should be asking is, how could it have happened 7 times already? That's how many times the scenario has been run by Corcom and its clients, state restaurant associations, over the past couple years. Michigan, Rhode Island, Maryland, Ohio, Illinois, New York, and Massachusetts. That's where state restaurant associations have found their bottom lines under attack by One Fair Wage, and in their panic of what to do, they turned to Corcom. Corcom is a conservative consulting group that offers, among other things, rigged surveys. What do I mean when I say rigged? I mean that the survey in question is designed to have a predetermined outcome. In this case, the restaurant associations want a survey that says workers don't want their minimum wage to go up. So let's talk about how these surveys are rigged. The root of this rigging can be traced back to how the surveys were distributed. The distribution is described in the survey summaries as being done by restaurant owners and managers, which is a questionable enough method on its face. The responsibility for distribution goes through the state restaurant associations and their members, not through Corcom. A reasonable person might ask the question, wouldn't state restaurant associations have an incentive to distribute the surveys only to employees likely to give answers the restaurant associations want to hear? And that's a great question. I think that's exactly what happened. I think the state restaurant associations handpicked the takers of their surveys, and I think I can prove it. To start, let's look at the data on the Illinois map to see where the results came from. And one thing should jump out to you immediately. 19% from Springfield? They got about 1/5 of their results from a county that makes up 1.5% of the population of the state of Illinois. How did that happen? I get that Springfield is the capital of Illinois, but it's not that big a city. Is this random statistical noise? Or is it because that's where Karen Kahn, a member of the Illinois Restaurant Association Board of Directors, owns a bunch of restaurants? Here's a hint. When a bill on increasing the minimum wage for tipped workers came before the Illinois legislature, Karen and a few friends showed up to testify against it. And by a few friends, I mean employees of her company, Kahn Hospitality Group. Her banquet director showed up, her facilities director showed up, her sales director showed up, and her marketing director showed up to testify against increasing the minimum wage for tipped workers. Karen even got listed as testifying 4 separate times for some godforsaken reason, which is probably just a formatting error, but I firmly believe she would have if she could have. So it's probably a safe bet that Karen and Kahn Hospitality are more than a little responsible for 19% of the survey results coming from Springfield, especially with the small sample size in Illinois of 281 people. And that's not the only time something like this has happened. The Ohio survey has the same issue. 8% of their survey results came from Athens, Ohio. The county that contains Athens makes up 0.5% of Ohio's total population. It shouldn't be providing 8% of the results in a statewide survey. Except it wasn't a statewide survey, was it? It was a survey created by restaurant owners selecting which of their workers they trusted the most and giving them the survey to fill out. Which is how Athens got up there, because Dan Ostreich, a member of the Ohio Restaurant and Hospitality Alliance Board of Directors, owns 3 restaurants in Athens and has hosted 2 meetings organizing against an increase in the minimum wage. So I'll ask, why do you think Athens, Ohio is so overrepresented in this survey? Why is Springfield so overrepresented in the Illinois survey? Is it just statistical noise? Or is it because State Restaurant Association Board of Directors members who don't want to increase the minimum wage are handpicking survey takers at their own restaurants to manipulate the outcome? But let's move on to some more concrete data than maps. Which is hard because these survey reports from Corcom don't include any crosstabs. You know, like how a real survey company would present the data. But we will muddle through because even though these are just facile little charts, they are enough to raise serious questions about how this survey was distributed. I'm going to ignore the opinion questions because what's the point? As I outlined earlier, why would you look at opinion data from a survey where the participants were handpicked to create a specific outcome? It'll just tell you whatever opinion the survey givers wanted to come through in the survey. No. The important data from these surveys is the demographic data, because it tells a story. And that story is, who did restaurant owners trust to give the quote-unquote right answers? And I can answer that thanks to these surveys, because the profile of the average survey taker that emerges is significantly different from the general population and the population of tipped workers. For example, why are these surveys wider than a polar bear in Utah? That's not a joke. The surveys are much wider than the general population. In Ohio, the sample group for the survey was 9 percentage points wider than the general population at large. In New York, it was 7 percentage points, and in Illinois, the sample group was a cartoonishly 16 percentage points wider than the population in general. Out of the 4 survey reports I managed to get my hands on, only one was even close, and that was Massachusetts, which was more or less even with the population at large. Which is still not very accurate because the group that makes up the most tipped workers, waiters and waitresses, is actually pretty diverse, ethnically speaking. According to the National Restaurant Association, waiters and waitresses, who make up the vast majority of tipped workers, white people trail in representation by about 10%. As in, white people in general make up 60% of the population of the US and 54% of the population of waiters and waitresses. So even in Massachusetts, where the white population of the survey lined up with the population at large, it's still off because it doesn't represent the population of waiters and waitresses. But the real star here is Illinois, because Illinois was 16 percentage points off the population in general. And the Illinois State Restaurant Association knew this would look really bad. So how did they represent it in their survey? Well, here's a side-by-side with Massachusetts and Ohio. The ethnicity data is displayed at the bottom, and you may have noticed an issue. Yeah, it looks like the way they covered up this obvious issue was to try and hide the data. Except I told you what the exact percentage in Illinois was, so how did I know that if it wasn't in the report? Well, it wasn't in the body of the report, but after deleting it, they apparently forgot to scrub it from the summary of the report, and sitting right there is the number, 77%. But it's time for us to move on. I don't feel qualified to tell you why they oversampled white people, or what that means, or whether state restaurant associations, their board of directors, or restaurant owners are racist. Or as the second largest demographic group in Ohio put it, at least according to Corcom, I prefer not to answer. I do, however, feel qualified to comment on the meaning of another demographic anomaly in the survey, wages. I have the survey data for 4 states. I don't have exact numbers, but Corcom does do ranges, so I can do some generalizations. And if I do some fancy math, I can get an average that's good enough for our purposes. In Ohio, this is the range. If I multiply the lowest number of the wage range by the percent it represents and add the sum of all those together, I should get a pretty good idea what the floor is for the lowest average wage that is possible given the information. For example, in Ohio, the lowest wage in this range is $10.45. If I multiply it by the percent it represents of the whole, we will get around 52 cents. Doing the same thing for all the ranges gives me this, and when I add all the products together, this is the answer I get. The lowest possible average wage from the data in this survey, $25.52. I feel very confident about this method and this number, especially since the Ohio State Restaurant Association has used their study to claim that both the average and median wage of tipped workers in the state is $27. And before I go any further, that is not accurate. That's not how average or median works. Stop using them interchangeably. Most people learn this in middle school. Anyway, doing this for all the surveys gives us the following amounts. And now let's check in with the Bureau of Labor Statistics to see if that is all representative of the population at large. You know, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the agency that actually does this for real, not some fly-by-night conservative company that puts together phony baloney surveys to manipulate public opinion. Survey says... Oh, what a shock, the numbers are horribly off. And in all the same direction, too. That kind of consistency is actually kind of impressive. The average is about $6 to $8 per hour more than the average wages for that field in the state. So the state restaurant associations and Corcom, as part of their profile for preferred survey takers, had people who were doing better than most other people in their field. Oh, you mean people who make more money are more likely to be happier with the current system and less likely to want it to change? Where do you get such insights? And no, it's not particularly revelatory, but it is nice to be confirmed. In something that might be considered corollary data, the sample groups appear to consist of people that have been in the field for at least 6 years, making up to 60 to 70% of the sample group. Which is not suspicious in of itself, but it is when you combine it with the next piece of data, the ages of the participants. This is the demographic data showing the ages of the survey participants. 16 to 17-year-olds make up 2% or lower across the board. Citing the National Restaurant Association again, 16 to 17-year-olds represent around 8.4% of waiters and waitresses. It seems they've been massively underrepresented by these surveys. And that's our profile. That's who took the survey. When state restaurant associations are distributing this survey, they aim to distribute it to someone who is white, makes more money than average, and is older. Goodness, I wonder how Corcom and state restaurant associations came to the conclusion that old rich white people don't like change. And I joke, but the joke gets less funny when you realize people take these joke surveys seriously. News organizations give surveys like this credibility they don't deserve. Lawmakers use them to justify their votes. Normal people hear this on the news and use it to make decisions on what to support. And state restaurant associations aren't just using this survey to push their agenda. At the same time they are using this survey to justify paying their workers less, they are also claiming, because of this survey, that they can speak for their tipped workers.
On behalf of Ohio's 24,821 restaurant and food service locations and Ohio's 564,000 restaurant and food service employees, the Ohio Restaurant and Hospitality Alliance appreciates the opportunity to speak today. As I and the rest of our ORHA team travel the state, we have heard from servers and bartenders in communities, Ohio communities, small and large, from fine dining to family diners to chili parlors, who all share one common theme: don't mess with our tips. And now the numbers that we've just gotten from our survey back that up. Servers overwhelmingly agree that the current system works well for them and should not be changed. Doing so would hurt them and their livelihoods.
Yeah, they rigged a survey and now they are the official spokesmen for all their workers. That's probably not how the Lorax got his job. But the survey isn't in any way representative of any of the workers in any of the states they were conducted in. And before I wrap this video up, I don't even know if I'd go as far as saying some of these state restaurant associations even speak for the restaurants in their state. For example, the Ohio Restaurant and Hospitality Alliance. I mean, it's in their name and they represent themselves as such, but when it comes to membership, out of the 24,000 food service locations in Ohio, they only represent about 40% of them. That's right, these restaurant associations don't even speak for a majority of restaurants. And I didn't find this information on their website or anything. They dropped it in a presentation to a Chamber of Commerce meeting. The presentation was on, of course, their fight against an increase in the minimum wage. So these surveys don't actually survey anything. The state restaurant associations don't really speak for their workers or even the restaurants in their state, and Corcom is the #1 name in survey results for sale. I'm History Sock, and I'll see you at the next committee hearing.